Hi friends, it's a late hour here in Finland, but I'm quite determined to finish section 1 tonight. It will be program 45 of Discipleship in the New Age, volume 1, section 1, and the end of part 9, video commentary. And it's almost midnight, so I put 13 to 14 of September. And we're almost on page 100, and it ends at page 102. So, I better be able to do that, even though the hour is late. And any little segue here? The Tibetan says, as time goes on, I shall try to bridge between the old techniques and the newer modes of training by using a part of the ancient techniques, now becoming somewhat obsolete, though, if I may say, he even quoted an ancient ritual, which, did he say was older than the stanzas of Dzyan? And he offered it to us, and it has considerable value, I think. Page 285 or so of Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2. So, okay, he's offering some of the ancient techniques and also the giving of those hints which will lead you to understand the nature, purpose, and methods of educating accepted disciples in the processes of initiation. Now, remember that when he first gathered those who would be incorporated into his 9 groups of 9, was it? And 1 group of 27. He never got that far. He basically filled out the personnel of 4 groups of 9, correlated with the first 4 seed groups, and then 1/3 of group number 5, which would be the political organizers. There was no guarantee that all of those people were accepted disciples. Some had been for quite a while. Some were being accepted, and I do think that some had some kind of technical acceptance before them. If they became truly accepting disciples and made their pledge accordingly, then they were on the way to rapidly become accepted disciples, and by the time he reorganized the seed group work in 1939, 1940, all except 1 who were in that part of reorganization were accepted. Well, they were all accepted disciples, but only 1 had not taken the first initiation. There are always exceptions to the rule. And probably we're learning some principles here, but we probably don't realize all the intricacy that is involved with each one being an individual case, and maybe each group having its individuality, and each planet and each solar logos and so forth. But we certainly have enough to go on if we only will. I say that to myself all the time, May I've studied all this for 50 years as of this year. And I say to myself, well, I know something, but I don't know anything until I am truly willing to bring it forward into usefulness. So I say, do I truly will? Am I bringing an aspect of the divine plan forward into usefulness to my fellow human beings, whom I have to learn how to love, every one of them, regardless of their personality foibles, because in essence, they are the Spirit and they are myself. And that's where identification comes in. So DK is winding up this section now of talks to disciples. There's so much more to do. Each one of those books is Dina 1, Dina 2. Each one is more than 700 pages. I know better than to think that I'll be able to converse with you about the entirety of each book. So far with Dina 1, which he said was such a important book for drawing people into the ashram. I've just done the first and last sections. And knowing that so much of the really great information and teaching value is involved with the letters themselves. Now we have a group of very astute esoteric astrologers, Elena Dramcini, Jeffrey Logie, Nicholas Newland, Philip Lindsay, B.L. Allison. They're working on confirming who these people were in everyday life, because sometimes you can tell a lot about why DK drew them towards himself or invited them to participate on the basis of their work in the world. Some of them did have significant work in the world. Others, for karmic reasons, may have been deferring that and may have been learning certain lessons. Everybody is such an unique case, even though the basic principles hold. And it takes someone like Master DK to see that uniqueness, which truly characterizes each individual who could be part of these either groups of 9 or reorganized seed group work and so forth. What I know so far, what I have deduced so far is that the groups of 9 were forming, the war came along, the second part of the Great War, precipitating drastically through the Axis powers, and then everything had to be changed. The group of 24 was receiving a text from that has become Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, a manual for initiation and for preparation in between times for initiation. And then there was another group of 14, I believe. They gathered with Alice Bailey at the time of the full moon to discuss the ashram, because after all, she knew something about it. And for them, the rules, the advance rules for disciples and initiates were created. That was their substance. And it has come down to us. You have to think about what they all had to go through in those early days. 80 years ago, something like that. They didn't have the internet. They couldn't be present with each other in the way we can, face to face over huge distances. So how much we do owe the third ray, fifth ray communications group for evolving this mode of intercommunication. The master is an adept, and what we learn about adepts is that they adapt to the circumstances which the human being has created, and to unavoidable things which the human race has precipitated upon itself. They're always working to get the best out of any situation. And one day, of course, we will be as they are, and be able to help others who are probably now in the animal kingdom, or maybe have been individualized but are trapped in the forms which arose from what the theosophical thought form calls the sin of the mindless. Anyway, everybody in the great chain of hierarchy helps everybody else. There's a link. A hand above, being held up, a hand below, holding up And we don't want to break that link. We want to, in the most most responsible way, to continue to promote the great chain of hierarchy. I kind of like doing these discussions spontaneously. I spent some meticulous time doing them in writing, and they are available on Makara, but it's a bit of a fresh look, and we know when it comes to Master DK that always a fresh look is desirable, because what we forget is a tremendous amount of what should be remembered. Sometimes I think I exaggerate if I say I understand 1% of what he says. Sometimes I might push it to 5%. But do I really know? No, but I trust. I trust after 50 years. I trust. And I think that's something we all have to develop. It's not a dependency. It shouldn't become that. But it should be a deep trust. Master Moria refers to it as the mine, like a gold mine, the mine of trust. Such is the link, or should be, between the teacher and the chela. So when he begins with something that says above all, because he does arrange things in priority, and it looks like above all is pretty high on the list. Above all, I would say, seek to recover the fervor of your earlier spiritual aspiration and self-discipline. Well, he did say at one point, I wish you were younger, okay, and more courageous. I think those were the two things on his wish list with respect to the remaining disciples that he was dealing with, because a lot of them dropped out or were temporarily not continued in the future projects because they had reached what he called their high water mark. So the word fervor, is an intense word. It's related to fervent. It has to do with intense aspiration, spiritual aspiration, not something where you're desiring something with the astral body that really has nothing to do with advancing the work, and self-discipline. And I can tell you, it's sometimes an easier thing to discipline yourself when you're just a little younger than some of us who are euphemistically a bit older. If you have never lost it, that is the spiritual aspiration and self-discipline, though many disciples have, he adds, seek to force that energy of inspiration. Notice the word force. This is not a casual, laissez-faire attitude. He says, seek to force that energy of inspiration to work out in an effective display of definite action upon the physical plane. Well, he is looking at people who stand in two categories. Everybody had spiritual aspiration, self-discipline. Some have lost it, and some have not. And those who have not have a duty to inspire. I somewhere it talks about the hierarchy working through inspiration. And we know how good it feels when we've been able to inspire someone. It's a breathing in of the fire, isn't it? And the fire is close to reality. Master Moria says there are 4 types of people. The fiery ones are the ones we're interested in, he says, of course, because he promotes the yoga of fire. But he says it doesn't have anything to do with the element which characterizes your astrological sun sign. You can have a water sign and still be among those he lists as the fiery people. Maybe it does help to have that element in your chart, but it is not an absolute requirement. So, effective display, it means something, you show it, it's definite, it's visible upon the physical plane. Does that mean that writers cannot do this? Well, no, they produce books and documents. And what about artists? They may produce works of art, or they may act or dance or sing. Something's coming through. So it is possible to bring effective display through onto the physical plane from the mental level, the emotional level, or the etheric physical level, and through the personality as a whole, if it is aligned with the place from which the inspiration for display is emanating. But anyway, DK anticipates that people will ask questions, and so he answers them before they even ask. How, you ask, my brothers? How to bring, not even bring, but force that energy of inspiration. Force it. I think it's a word that people with a strong first ray like to use. Sometimes it causes a lot of trouble, but other times it's the only way, and DK does say that he has somewhat of the first ray in his spiritual triad, meaning probably an atmic focus. How, you ask, my brothers? By increasing the radiance of your light in the world through love and meditation, so that others may turn to you as a beacon light in the dark night of life, which seems in this century, namely 20th century, which seems in this century to have descended upon humanity. This is how to get the inspiration to work out. And obviously, not easy. And many shy away from it with alibis. And later regret that they did not seize the day. I've been in that position. I suppose you have. Past opportunity, well, it's often accompanied by a bit of mourning, grieving, what I could have done. Or as the people in the 12-step program called AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, speak of would have, could have, should have. But they're brave enough to go beyond that. So that's why he said, look, not only do I wish you were younger, which would mean, I well understand, more full of expendable energy, but I wish you were more courageous. When it comes to courage, I'm thinking, it crosses my mind. There was a man who was Alice Bailey's secretary. He was a very second-rate type with second-rate soul, fourth-rate personality, fourth-rate mind. And he disliked very much to importune people about the financial needs of the Lucis Trust and the Arcane School. But he did. He did it. He overcame his reticence, his trepidation, his fear. And DK complimented him on that he had taken a step that was so necessary for him. Other things befell him along the way, but eventually after leaving the work, he also returned. Now DK goes on and says, how can we do it? How can we do it? Seek to love more than you have ever believed was possible, so that others, frozen and chilled by life circumstance and the present horror of human existence, may turn to you for warmth and comforting. Wow, that's, I'm going to keep that in the blue. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful, and it means, no exceptions. Even the people who repel us personally, we never know what has befallen them upon their developmental path. I'm going to read that again because it's such a challenge, isn't it? Seek to love more than you have ever believed was possible. That's why he said when you're having an altercation with somebody and criticism and you don't approve, DK says, how do you respond? Do you love them? He says, as the first thing. It's probably not the first thing for so many of us. Do you love them? Well, anything else he kind of looks at as a pettiness of personality interaction. Seek to love more than you have ever believed was possible, so that others, frozen and chilled by life, circumstance, and the present horror of human existence, because, well, we are closing in now on what the Axis powers brought to humanity, so that others may turn to you for warmth and comforting. I'm reminded that sometimes our presidents in the United States have a certain function called consoler in chief, chief comforter. Some of it is done correctly and the president accepts the responsibility. Others are too selfish and do not. Yet, do we love them? Well, we know that Christ does. And if we can just find in our consciousness why it is that he does, maybe we will have that mind as it is in Christ. Nicely said, but difficult to achieve. Well, who ever said that the thorny path of occultism was easy to tread? The promise is great, and as D.K. Riley says, the rewards are adequate, but the courage to tread that path. D.K. goes on. What I and all who are affiliated with the hierarchy, he doesn't say I'm a master yet, what I and all who are affiliated with the hierarchy seek to do at this time of desperate crisis is to find those who are dependable points of living energy, and through them pour out the love, the strength, and the light which the world needs and must have if this storm is to be weathered. So this is probably a section in Dinah 1 where written at the time that the Second World War is precipitating. You know, he wrote these, what became this book, as lesson sets going out to students he had gathered. So I don't have the exact time that this could have been written, but you can see there is a storm. And what Japan did in relation to China, and the Anschluss of Germany in relation to Austria, and the taking over of Czechoslovakia, and all of that. These are the storm. Now, I know we're looking back some 80 years, a bit more than 80 years, and it could seem remote. I mean, look at all the problems we have now. But it was a decisive kind of Armageddon which was about to occur. And if DK, who does not exaggerate, uses a word like horror, he does mean it. He wants us not to be fluctuating points of approaching and receding energy or light. He wants us to keep approaching. And that, of course, requires courage and self-discipline and an adequate supply of energy. But I do remember that there was one of his chelas who was aggrieved over the fact that I think he was bedridden or kind of an invalid. And DK assured him that he could accomplish as much from his very constrained circumstances as many others who had energy and mobility. There's always a way. There's always a way. If we have the will. Okay, now, what further is he saying? I ask you to render this service to me and to humanity. Okay? To be a dependable point of living energy through whom love, strength, and light can be poured and shared with humanity. I ask you to render this service to me and to humanity. He asks, he doesn't order, he asks. I ask nothing spectacular. So often the ambitious personality wants to do something outstanding, which others recognize. It's a form of personal ambition. I ask nothing spectacular, he says. It will, however, require a strenuous effort of your souls if you are to respond adequately. So these people have to be at least soul aligned, and the alignment of soul, mind, and brain has to be somewhat working for them. It's not just a personality effort. That would not be adequate. A strenuous effort of your souls if you are to respond adequately. I ask nothing impossible. Well, that would be doomed to failure, and a master is too prescient to demand something that's absolutely going to fail. I ask nothing impossible. I would remind you that the apathy, it's kind of a tamasic state, right? It's kind of like, what do? I don't know what to do, so I don't do anything. I would remind you, he says, that the apathy of the physical body and brain, the inertia of the feeling nature, where people cease wanting what is good and aspiring, the inertia of the feeling nature, and the sense of futility of the mind when confronted with large issues will seem to hinder you. I guess he's saying they really don't need to be hindered if they simply understood the way through. I don't think things are much different now. I feel, I'm sure so many of us do, that ongoing demand from Master Decay, just the way he's demanding of those some 80-something years ago. What he said then applies now also. Do we sense that that is the case? Can we identify enough with those former conditions to say, yes, even now, it is the case? How many are there who are bringing forward true spiritual occultism? How many are there? Well, the Master would know the numbers, but it's not an overwhelming amount. There are many men and women of goodwill and also servers who are not working deliberately along the occult lines. But those of us who know what can be done esoterically, occultly, it's a double responsibility. And we have to believe Master DK here. I ask nothing impossible. Sometimes we say, oh, that's too hard for me. And we let it go. And even very promising disciples at those times just let things go. and said, I just can't do this, or I don't want to do this. Others maintain their intense interest, but somewhere we're going to read along in Dinah 2, and he's going to say that 8 of you remain. Out of all those people, 8, only 8. Well, when the incarnational life is regrasped, people will get another chance. There's always, forever, another chance. Maybe not in terms of a certain time limit, but eventually, because the great breath is eternally breathing, there's always another chance. So we can assess then, what do we gauge to be our hindrances? Well, so much of that is about recognizing what has to be purified. Remember, the energy is coming from Shambhala: purification, destruction, organization. The second ray part of it is the purification, and destruction, of course, the first ray. Organization, the third ray. And if we give in to that sense, oh, I am obstructed, I am hindered, I am stopped, it's not the way of the true accepted disciple. Which, of course, we seek to become because of the additional power to help and to serve, and not because the Master will be somehow closer to us, Now at last I'm accepted. No, it's not that. Again, says Master DK, I point the way to you, and again I wait. I think Siddhartha, in the Hessa book by that name, talked about his accomplishments. I can think, I can wait, I can fast. That's what Siddhartha said. And this is Master DK's attitude, and why should it be any different now, as applied to those of us who in group formation are approaching him? Some may be reincarnated aspects of those who were there before. Again, I point the way to you, and again I wait. Will you intensify your inner life and achieve the power which will enable you to live simultaneously as an efficient human being and a living, loving soul? That term efficiency is interesting because it can lead to a certain glamour that is found on the third ray, it's called the glamour of efficiency. I can handle everything, you know. But we have to put together the third aspect and the second aspect, both. So this is a question for us. We have to intensify our inner life. Well, he gives the method, but what method do you use? What method do I use? Of course, meditation and the blessing of others, parent others, trying to slip into the meditation of the soul within the causal body egoic lotus. He says, this is an objective so important, which few have achieved. Master DK expects us to intensify our inner life. And can we monitor ourselves in such a way that we recognize that we are really doing this? He says it is strenuous. And that's what the Buddha says, too. Being strenuous, thoughtful, and mindful. Be strenuous in your efforts. The Buddha was a powerful being with a strong first subray on his wisdom-inclined second ray. He demanded strenuousness, strenuous effort. I used to think I could really produce that, having become now older and unhappily a bit decrepit. The strenuousness has to appear in other ways than the physical. But there's always a way. I keep on remembering the man confined to his bed who DK encouraged by telling him how he could work with equal strength to those who were out and about in the normal expenditure of human energy. So, you've got to live, I've got to live simultaneously as an efficient human being, which itself is no small thing. Alice Bailey was given as one of her keynotes skill in action. As a manager of that whole Lucis Trust, she really needed it, didn't she? So going on with what DK says, it is the establishing of the continuity, not just, now and then, the establishing of the continuity of this dual process, which is the main need at this time. You are the loving soul. You are the efficient human being. It seems a simple thing to assess. And sometimes I think we realize that we have a handle on doing this better than at other times. But he asks for continuity. It is the establishing of the continuity of this dual process, which is your main need at this time. It will lead to fusion. Remember that transcends integration? It will lead to fusion, personality coordination, and a greatly increased efficiency. We cannot say we have not been advised. But how seriously we take the fulfillment of the instruction, well, you will know. We all judge ourselves before the bar of the soul. It's like the passing of the bar. My granddaughter has just taken the bar and has the makings of a brilliant lawyer. One simply waits and sees whether one has passed the bar. And so we must assess whether we have this kind of continuity of efficiency and love. The third aspect, the second aspect, and the growth through antikarana building, antikarana building of the first aspect. Many disciples are not young. Oh, here he goes. Many disciples are not young, and the settled habit of thought and of feeling is not easy to disrupt. A first-rate word, right? They must, however, be disrupted, and you must feel no resentment. And right there, may I say, would be one of the pettinesses of personality response, the feeling of resentment for having to change one's ways. I offered to an associate the opportunity to learn the great invocation. And this associate said, I have my own way of praying. Okay, maybe true, but what an opportunity missed in the refusal to learn about a word of power which would come to humanity only because of the great sacrifice of the Christ. So disruption of the right kind is called for, and none of that pettiness of resentment. And it's amazing the number of things that he calls pettinesses. Quite normal behavior from our perspective. He goes on, the rhythms of the personality are stabilized and constitute your line of least resistance. Someone asked the other night in a program, is a line of least resistance good or bad? In a way, it's both. And here, we have something where it means just going along as usual. So it's not adequate. I do remember this word coming up. It's an old word. You must cut athwart these lines of least resistance, thus forming the cross of life. And existence will then take on added difficulty, which by now, of course, we expect. I don't think there's anything easy that DK is proposing, but at least it's, as he says, not impossible. The results will be new rhythms of beauty. So by going through the pain, we come to something even better than what is our temporary condition. But we do need the faith, don't we, that these greater rhythms of beauty, an altogether more purposeful and plan-dominated life, is on its way. Athwart. I have to put that in because it's one of those sentences that somehow I have remembered. The word is an old word. An old word. Okay. Master DK goes on. To those who are standing in the blaze of pain, and their numbers are legion. Their numbers are legion. May I add, so many. By the time that the axis of evil at that time really began to take hold, to those who are standing in the blaze of pain, and their numbers are legion, of agony, anxiety, and distress, seeing it on every hand and attempting to stand steady. In the midst of all, I say, that which appears is not always, I guess this is that, is not always that which truly is. That which rends and disrupts the personality life is frequently the agent of release, if rightly apprehended. That which will emerge when the forces of light have penetrated the world, darkness, will demonstrate the nature of the underlying human spirit. Basically, he's telling them and telling us that appearances are not realities. It's a bit like the Buddha asking us to detach from the phenomenal world and go into the suchness, which is the reality. Well, it was a horrific precipitation, the second part of the Great War, 1914 to 1945. When you think of what those people went through, and maybe some of them earlier reincarnated aspects of ourselves, maybe, not necessarily, it was, if forced upon them, a horrific experience, and if those who should not have ignored the difficulties ignored them, well, the price would be theirs to pay for abdication of responsibility. DK says basically here that good will arise out of evil, whether it's true evil or seeming evil. The good of the will to good will arise. Now, if we have not proven that to ourselves, it does remain to be proven. And it will require courage to prove it. Nothing we can do about our age, the age of the body, not yet, anyway. But about the courage required to prove that the good is better than that which has been, over that we have some control. Now what does he say? To all of you I say, my love surrounds you, and the aura of the ashram, of which I am the center, stands like a great defending wall around you and around all who are battling for the right. May I add, has this changed? I think not. We have to look at this word battle, because he says, see that you battle. That's another one of those sentences that I will always remember. See that you battle. Because some people, of course, chose the way of apathy and retreat from external action and so forth. It was not permissible in his eyes. DK goes on, you can then, if you will, sense this loving protection. Like a great defending wall. And he calls us to battle. I take it seriously as if I were there at the time that this was written. I don't see that things have much changed. And I'll make that one red also. He has often said, I love you, but the battle is yours. Maybe we will wonder why we have to go through these things. Well, our planet is taking a kind of subsidiary fourth initiation. The fourth ray is the ray of battle. It's the ray of conflict. Until the harmony supervenes and until the higher of the pairs of opposites dominates the lower. And probably for any one of us, that is not a continuous condition. Okay, if we battle, and we battle through love, and we battle through light, and we battle through sacrifice, you can then, if you will, sense this loving protection. Now, if you will, note this. Each day, if you will, you can put yourself en rapport with your master. Now, here it may be Master DK with his training ashram, or maybe there are others reading this who can put themselves en rapport with a different master if it's not Master DK. You can sense, if you will, he says, this loving protection. You can put yourself en rapport with your master. We are not blind or uncaring. We know, however, that there are worse evils than death and pain. We know. Think about that. Worse evils than death and pain. We know that this is the hour of humanity's greatest opportunity. And that if men can pass triumphantly through this, note the Scorpio idea, which rules the Buddhic plane of intuition. If men can pass triumphantly through this, and by the strength of their own souls, surmount this very present evil, then the evolution of humanity will be hastened beyond all that was believed possible. It will constitute a release, self-achieved and self-initiated. May I say we're getting the Master's perspective here, which for the millions in agony, horror, anxiety, may not be their perspective yet, but he tries to give it to us so we can take comfort. And here is that moment. And was it more so then? Well, many have called this advisedly the Armageddon. I was in the Agni Yoga Society one fine day talking to the director at old times, 40 years ago, a little more. No, a little less. And the person there said, yes, the World War II was the Armageddon. Well, this is what she certainly did believe. So think about, then, what is the strength of your own soul? How do you recognize that strength coming forth? Humanity did, as we now know, surmount that very present evil. And it's because they were able to evoke response from such powerful shambolic beings that the danger of the complete destruction and retrogression of humanity was at that time avoided, as DK explains. Then the evolution of humanity will be hastened beyond all that was believed possible. Apparently, we're heading into that type of hastening. Yes, there are still obstacles. And kind of a rearguard action is taking place, and once again the Black Lodge is on the attack, hoping to foment a religious war from which humanity as we know it would not survive. Well, a release, self-achieved and self-initiated. This is, again, like the Buddha saying, rely upon yourself. He doesn't only mean the personal self, he means the personal self enhanced by the infusion of additional high energies which are a truer self. So going on, DK says, this means as much in the life of mankind as it means in the life of the individual disciple. that chance and that opportunity must not be taken from man to achieve a release which is self-initiated and self-achieved. The gained spiritual and eternal values are of far greater importance than the temporary agony. Well, yes, and then try to tell that to the one who is without sufficient courage passing through that temporary agony. When I was a young person, my grandfather and then my grandmother owned a farm in Lower Michigan. The war had just ended, and I was just a child, and I saw all the women gather constantly around the table, telling their war stories, the loss of their relatives, horrible things which maybe I didn't understand then and only begin to understand now. They had escaped being immigrants at an earlier time. If they had remained, they'd be dead. But they made it to a place where they could flourish. But still they left behind many relatives who died in that Holocaust, which consumed not only Jews, but all kinds of people. Destroyed because of the national egotism of certain Axis groups. It was a moment, or moments, I remember. It seemed like that's what they had to do after the war. They gathered and they talked of the horrors, the agonies of which they had heard and of which they had been informed. I told you also about a celebration. I think I was only 2 years old. Somehow I have a memory of a party where a phonograph was playing around and around Hitler's grave. Around and around we go. I knew nothing, but it made its impression upon me at that early time. People experienced a great release. For some it was well-earned, self-achieved, self-initiated. For others it was incidental and simply happened because the powers of democracy, at least in principle, had prevailed over the malevolent axis of the times. Evil is very mobile. It goes from group to group and stands out when you least expect it, and there it is. Centers of evil do exist. Just like Master Moria warns, the Lodge of Darkness leaves the carcasses of animals scattered here and there to create centers of evil. They have their methods, and those methods are meant to stop progress for humanity. And here comes I am, of course, remembering now these final sections. DK is always so good at giving a summary, a wind-up, a synthesis of what he's been trying to say to us, if we could only listen and absorb. Little as you may realize it, as you think of us, capital us, in our capital, so-called safe retreats, the capacity of identification, which with all that is involved in world pain today, that's, may I say, what the masters are feeling, and the sensitivity of those connected with the hierarchy to the unhappy condition of humanity makes their task of standing by one of supreme spiritual agony. I'm not sure we can understand really what he means. Maybe not having gone through it. The idea is, oh, we're out here, we're suffering, we're being killed, we're at war, and you are in your safe retreat and nothing is happening in that way for you. Of course, a few years later in China, plenty happened in Tibet with the Chinese invasion and the attempted destruction of the Tibetan culture. So DK is trying to set the matter straight here. We are with you, he's saying. We stand by, and for us, it is a supreme spiritual agony because we know what is at stake if the wrong actions are taken. Well, we'll know more what he's talking about when we reach that point. But even now, it strikes me his insistence on right human relations and on love. So when you are against the methods and the ways of another person in their personality nature, he asks, very first thing, what do you do about it? Do you love him or her or them? It's an unusual first question. So they're involved, the masters, in that time as the war was precipitating, because it could not be stopped by sufficient goodwill. They were in a state of supreme spiritual agony because of their capacity to identify. Of whom or of which the Christ is the great expert as far as our planet is concerned. Of the masters, DK says now, they understand the depths of the reaction of humanity. They comprehend and understand. Look for the fourth meditation in Dina 2, and you'll see how those words are emphasized. They comprehend and understand, for they are one with all men. Maybe that's, may I say, a meaningless, platitudinous statement, but for the masters it is real because of their identification, not just with, but as all human beings. This, says the Tibetan, this involves a far greater comprehension than you can grasp, and one which can only be adequately expressed in the word identification. Even in our little efforts, from the time the second initiation is taken, we can begin to work with the understanding of identification. It really starts with the start of isolated unity at the third degree and goes on to intensify from that time on. It helps to know, doesn't it, what the masters can do compared to what we can do, so we keep an adjusted sense of right proportion. So this far greater comprehension is expressed by the word identification. Okay. The masters, they need the staunch support of all their disciples, the steadfast love, the loyal attitude, the unquestioning response to human need, which will enable them, capital T, enable them to carry more easily the heavy burden which human karma has laid upon them and which they carry voluntarily. Our karma, their spiritual agony. Have you found yourself ever in a state of true spiritual agony? sometimes one can slip into it momentarily. It would come from identification as the Spirit, as the group, as the nation, as humanity, as a whole, in all of its suffering on this planet, of purifying pain and releasing sorrow. Thus says the Tibetan, describing this school of magnetic work we're on, where the adjudication between the pairs of opposites occurs. But what do they need? They need the staunch support. It seems strange, doesn't it? I mean, masters need something from us. At least it's strange to the ordinary prosaic attitude. There, from that attitude, it is strange. They need our steadfast love, our loyal attitude, and the unquestioning response to human need. And it's a help to them. Unquestioning response to human need, which will enable them to carry more easily. Think of the weightlifter, think of the burden of the world in Aquarius, picking up the heavy load, helping Atlas uphold the world, which will enable them to carry more easily the heavy burden which human karma has laid upon them. Now, pause here. Think of the sacrifice. Maybe they don't have to respond as they do. But DK adds the heavy burden which human karma has laid upon them and which they carry voluntarily. If you're dealing with a beloved child, you're not saying, under general circumstances, hey, it's your problem. It's your karma. I'm just your parent. Maybe a parent can have something of this sense of identification and can feel something that begins to approach spiritual agony when the child is suffering or making apparently an egregious mistake. Of course, what the parent thinks may be egregious may not be in the long run, but parents are not generally what we're talking about here. We're talking about masters. But there is an analogy. So that's what DK needs from us. And, he really is so honest here, so imploring, you might say, of people like you and me and people some 80 years ago. Will you give this, he asks? Will you aid our work in every possible way? both as personalities dedicated to service and as souls who walk the lighted way. The need of humanity for love and light, the need of the hierarchy for channels, and for those who will work under direction upon the earth, can call forth all that you have to give and can evoke your soul. The only true reward that the disciple seeks can evoke your soul in power and love, because, may I say, the soul itself is light. This will happen if you will forget the little self. I wonder how many times he has to repeat that. It must be that it's very difficult to do, because for so long we have made the mistake of thinking that the little personal self is the true self, which it isn't. Even though we can enlist the personality in the cause when rightly guided by the soul. You can feel this imploring coming from the Tibetan. What must be the inertia? What must be the tamas of the average group member that he has to speak of these things with such intensity? Sometimes a flicker crosses my mind and I realize our unresponsive state, my own unresponsive state. And I see for a split second what it would be if real sensitivity, real responsiveness were there, ready to help. He ends with a blessing, that your knowledge may be transmuted into wisdom, and the eye of vision control your living processes and all your undertakings. Maybe we call it the eye of the soul, is the desire deep within my heart for each and all of you. We'll just pause, you think about how the Tibetan feels. Is feeling the right word? I'll just use it, how he feels about each and every one of us. From deep within his heart, whichever heart he may be referencing, there is that series of hearts, and usually we can include the heart between the the heart between the shoulder blades, the heart in the head, the heart which is the egoic lotus, the heart which is the monad. He wants from deep within his heart that knowledge coming in abundance from him at least, and presumably from intelligent living, may be transmuted into wisdom. And the eye of vision control your living processes. These are the higher types of eyes, until we come to what for any human being is the all-seeing eye, the capstone of the pyramid. The eye of vision control your living processes, and all your undertakings is the desire deep within my heart. For me, that hits home, you know. And he wants this for each and all of you. Your master, okay. Friend, hierarchy is friendship in its truest sense, and teacher, undoubtedly a master teacher, the Tibetan. He does not sign himself here as Jual Kul. Maybe that would have been his intention, to just hold it back so people would not develop a devotional attitude around his personality or his outer nature and so forth. Well, that's page 102, friends. I tend to want to linger. We have finished 45 programs of varying lengths. We've covered 102 pages. Necessarily, superficially, but perhaps indicatively. In other words, here are the Tibetan's words, and there are offered suggestions which may lift us along the upward arc of the ladder of evolution. A great loving soul and friend, the Tibetan, has been instructing us. At that time, when indeed some of us may have been in that group, maybe, and certainly now as we anticipate his externalization as one of 5 initially externalizing masters, and his regrasping of certain lines of development which were interrupted by the Great War, or the second phase of the Great War. And there hasn't been much peace since. It's really the warring 20th century. With the promise of greater peace in the 2100s, but, well, because after all, we have to establish the age of Aquarius astronomically in 2117 for the official beginning astronomically of the age of Aquarius. This he lets us know. So, okay, my desire and Tuya's and that of the communications team is to reach you in every possible way. Through classes, through meditations, through review of Master DK's books like I'm trying to do here, so that you may find elevation, so that we all may find it. What does he say? It's possible that this will be done in a way that is more rapid than any of us can conceive. If we can properly absorb, understand, turn knowledge into wisdom, turn desire into love, turn power into sacrifice, there will be great promise. The evolution of humanity, as he says here, I'll make it bigger, will be hastened beyond all that was believed possible. We really need that because we are in a state of retardation because of the moon chain failure, a more serious event in planetary history than probably we can understand. And we fell behind Venus. And with that great alter ego, we should have been keeping pace. But now, new opportunity comes and new challenges from those who don't want humanity to make its promised transition into an age of great wonder. The wonders of the new age. And finally, like any good teacher, he just says, good things are going to happen if you will just forget the little self. So let's work on that, friends. It's very difficult to do. If we're emotional, we focus on the little self because we're emotional. If we have disease and chaos physically, then we focus on the little self because we have disease and chaos on the outer form. If we're mentally disturbed, our focus is again on the little self because we are mentally disturbed. Now, all of these things would, to Master Decay, seem to be incidentals. And when he says not one thing that arises in the astral body, and he could include the other bodies in terms of disturbances, not one thing that arises, and I'll add, as a disturbance, is allowed to make any difference. And so a certain technique of divine indifference is called for because our spiritual values have at last ascended to where they should be. Now, the words are often easy, and he's clear what we have to do. But the battle is ours. See that you battle. We love you, they say, but the battle is yours. So, friends, that's the end of Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, Section 1, Talks to Disciples, Part 9, and a video commentary on all that. If I knew exactly what I would be doing next, I would tell you. But I have to ponder about what is the need and what is my capability. I feel very strongly supported by Tuya, who has a deep inner strength and wisdom, and by the members of the team. Mikhail, Biel, Joe, Michael, Bob, and to name those who are more frequently with us, and the others with my great appreciation because they come forward at the time of our virtual conference, which, by the way, we've just invited you to, our third virtual conference, taking place where? Everywhere. That's our age of ubiquity. Where are you? Everywhere. Okay. I have to stop because I tend to hang on. You know, it's a second-rate liability. But if you've made it this far, I'll just say I'm glad you have. And I have great hope that something of emergent consequence is coming to you through the study of these programs from Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1. And I'll have to ponder a little bit right now about where we go from here. And what it does mean, Section 1, Talks to Disciples. Section 3, the 6 Stages of Discipleship. Those 2 things are done. If I was capable and knew enough, I might attempt to get into some of the letters because they are so indicative of how not only how the Master thinks in general, but how he applies what he thinks to the specific psycho-spiritual case of each of his chelas. Then you really do think that his love surrounds you. This will be posted on Makara and also on our YouTube channel, Esoteric Moria Federation, Esoteric Education. Goodbye until tomorrow, friends. And maybe I'll come up with something that is an appropriate next step. Lots of love from all of us, and many blessings to each and every one of you.